morning air felt heavy as the new girl stepped through the school gates, unsure where to go or where to fit in. She moved slowly, almost hoping no one would notice her. Because being noticed often came with questions she didn't feel ready to answer. The school grounds buzzed with students talking, laughing, shouting, all comfortable in a place that still felt strange to her. She held her bag tightly against her side, the way someone holds onto something when they have nothing else familiar around them. This was her first day in this new place, and she already felt different from everyone else. She didn't speak much, partly because she was shy and partly because she had learned that silence kept life easier. When she used to talk more, people sometimes misunderstood her or made her feel small. So she kept her words close to herself like a secret she wanted to protect. When she entered her classroom, the students barely looked her way. A few glanced up, then went back to their conversations. She didn't mind. She preferred it that way. The teacher introduced her briefly, and she gave a polite, quiet nod. No one clapped. No one whispered anything rude. It was like she had slipped into the room unnoticed, which was exactly what she hoped for. She sat in the last row near the window. It gave her a small escape, a place where her mind could wander whenever things felt overwhelming. She watched the trees outside sway in the breeze, their branches moving like they were trying to talk to one another. She wished she could be like that, light, calm, and unafraid. The first few classes went by without much trouble. She listened carefully, took notes, and made sure not to draw attention. But one class, the one she feared the most, sat near the end of the day: music. Back in her old school, music was the one place where she felt alive, free, and understood. It was the only time her hands moved without fear and her heart opened without struggling. But here, in this new place, she wasn't ready to show any of that. She wanted to keep that part of her hidden, at least until she felt safe. When the bell rang, she walked slowly to the music room. The hallway felt longer than usual, as if each step stretched into two. The music classroom door was slightly open, letting soft sounds from a piano escape. It reminded her of moments she missed, moments she had kept close like a memory she didn't want to lose. Inside, the students were already settled. Some chatted loudly while a few practiced on small instruments. The teacher stood near the front, arranging sheets of music on a table. He was strict-looking, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He wasn't unkind, but he wasn't gentle either. He believed in discipline and expected everyone to follow rules without question. The girl quietly took a seat in the back row, hoping he wouldn't ask her to introduce herself again. She planned to simply sit, listen, and blend into the background. But blending in wasn't as easy as she hoped. The teacher glanced up and noticed her immediately. His eyes narrowed, not out of anger, but curiosity. He didn't like having students he didn't yet understand. "You're the new one," he said, looking directly at her. She nodded once, softly. "We participate in this class," he added. "Music is about expression, not hiding." She looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond. She wasn't trying to hide to be difficult, she just needed time. She hoped he would understand that, but from the tone of his voice, she knew he didn't. Class began with warm-ups. Students clapped rhythms, hummed short melodies, and practiced reading notes. She followed along quietly, doing everything correctly but softly enough that no one heard. She didn't want to make mistakes or draw attention. She just wanted to pass the time without causing trouble. But the teacher noticed her silence. Every time he scanned the room, his eyes paused on her a little longer. To him, her quietness looked like refusal, not nervousness. And the more he observed her, the more he convinced himself she wasn't trying. Halfway through the class, he suddenly clapped his hands loudly, making everyone jump a little. "All right," he said. "Since some of us need help learning how to participate, we're going to have a small activity." The students groaned playfully, expecting another group exercise. But then he said something that made the new girl's heart sink. "You," he said, pointing at her, "come to the front and play something on the piano." Her breath caught in her chest. She froze. Her hands tightened around the edge of her desk. She didn't know what to say. She didn't want this. Not here. Not now. She stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room turn toward her. She could hear whispers spreading, soft but sharp. Does she even know how to play? Maybe she'll mess up. I think she's too shy. She walked toward the piano with small steps, like she was walking to something uncertain. The teacher crossed his arms, watching her closely. He didn't say it out loud, but his expression made it clear. He thought she needed to be pushed. He thought this moment might teach her to speak up, to show effort. He didn't realize he was misreading everything. She reached the piano bench and sat down slowly. The keys looked familiar, comforting even, like greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in months. But the eyes watching her made the comfort fade. She kept her hands in her lap, unsure if she would even be able to play. Her fingers felt heavy. The teacher tapped his foot impatiently. "Any time now," he said, sounding almost amused. The girl swallowed hard. She wasn't scared of the piano. She was scared of attention, judgment, misunderstanding. She wanted music to be hers, not something forced out of her in front of strangers. But she also didn't want to create a problem. She had learned that staying quiet sometimes made things worse. So she lifted her hands slowly and placed them on the keys. The piano felt cool under her fingertips, reminding her of afternoons spent practicing in her old home, where no one watched except the sunlight that fell through the window. She hesitated. Her shoulders tensed. Her heart beat faster than the ticking clock on the wall. The teacher raised an eyebrow, as if waiting for her to fail. The class leaned forward, curious, expecting something awkward or maybe even funny. But inside her mind, something else stirred. A memory, a moment, a voice telling her she wasn't as small as she felt. She took a slow breath, letting it settle deep inside her chest. She wasn't ready yet, but something inside her whispered that the moment was coming, whether she wanted it or not. And as she sat there, with everyone watching, something in the room shifted just slightly, as if the piano was waiting for her to speak in the only way she truly knew how. The room felt too quiet as she sat at the piano, even though dozens of eyes were watching her. The kind of silence that makes every thought louder, every heartbeat stronger. She could almost hear her pulse in her ears, and she wished more than anything that she could shrink into the seat and disappear. She didn't want to be there, not in front of everyone, not with the teacher standing so close with that look of expectation mixed with impatience. She kept her hands lightly on the keys, barely touching them, trying to steady her breathing. It wasn't the piano she feared. It was the moment. It was the way the classroom had suddenly become a stage she never asked for. She could feel the weight of the room pressing against her back. The teacher crossed his arms and sighed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're waiting," he said, as if she was wasting precious time instead of trying to gather the pieces of her courage. A few students exchanged looks. Some smirked. A few leaned forward in curiosity. Others looked like they expected her to stumble and embarrass herself. She didn't blame them. They didn't know her. They didn't know what she carried inside her or how much she had been holding back since she arrived at this new school. They didn't know how difficult it was for her to stand in front of people and be seen. She took a breath that shook slightly on the way in. She wasn't ready to play. Not yet. But she also knew that staying frozen would only make things worse. She didn't want the teacher to think she was being difficult. She didn't want the class to think she was clueless. Her fingers trembled slightly as they rested on the keys. She closed her eyes for a second, hoping to find a small pocket of calm somewhere inside her. But instead of calm, memories rose to the surface, memories of her old school, where the music room felt like home, where she could play freely without fear. Back then, she had an audience too, but it was different. It never felt like judgment, felt like connection. Here, everything felt unfamiliar. She opened her eyes and saw the teacher still staring at her. He wasn't angry, but he seemed frustrated. He didn't understand why she was so reluctant. To him, she was simply refusing to participate, and it bothered him. He believed everyone should contribute, speak, show effort. Silence struck him as laziness, not fear. He stepped closer and said, "If you know how to play even a little, then just begin. And if you don't, that's fine, but you must try. Everyone tries in this class." The way he spoke stung a little, not because he was harsh, but because he was wrong about her. She wasn't refusing. She just needed a little more time, a little more space to breathe. But she knew she wouldn't get that here. So she took another deep breath and pressed down a single key. The soft note echoed lightly through the room. It wasn't anything special, but it was enough to break the tension. The class murmured softly, unsure of what to expect next. She lifted her hands for a moment and took another breath. The teacher tilted his head slightly, waiting. Her fingers hovered over the keys again, still hesitant but more grounded than before. As she prepared herself, she could hear whispers from the back of the room. Does she even know what she's doing? She looks scared. I bet she can't play. Their voices weren't loud, but they were sharp, cutting through her concentration. She swallowed hard. She hated moments like this. Moments where she felt like she had to prove something to people who didn't even know her. But she wasn't here to impress them. She just wanted to make it through the day. The teacher stepped away and leaned against his desk, watching her closely. He didn't say anything else, but his expression made it clear that he was waiting for something more meaningful than a single note. The girl looked down at her hands again. She flexed her fingers slightly, trying to wake up the muscle memory she had built for years. She didn't plan on showing anything impressive, but she wanted to at least show she wasn't completely clueless. She pressed a few more keys, slowly forming a simple melody. It was shaky at first, uncertain, like a voice trying to speak after being quiet for too long. She wasn't trying to perform. She was just trying to survive the moment. The class grew a little quieter. The teacher uncrossed his arms. One or two students leaned forward. She played a few bars of an old tune she remembered from her childhood. It wasn't complicated, but it was familiar, and familiarity gave her strength. Her fingers began moving a little more steadily, though still carefully, still afraid of attracting too much attention. As she continued, the teacher raised his eyebrow, realizing she wasn't as inexperienced as he assumed. She struck the keys with intention, even if her confidence hadn't fully returned. After half a minute, she lifted her hands and stopped playing. She wasn't ready to reveal more. She didn't want to draw applause or surprise. She simply wanted to show she wasn't refusing out of laziness. She stood up from the bench slowly and stepped back. "That's it," someone whispered loudly. She didn't even finish the song. "She's definitely nervous." She lowered her eyes and stepped away from the piano quietly, hoping the teacher would tell her to go back to her seat so she could disappear into the background again. But instead, the teacher frowned slightly and said, "You know more than you're showing." She froze for a moment, unsure if that was a compliment or a criticism. "You played carefully, but your technique shows practice," he added. "Why didn't you continue?" She opened her mouth slightly, then closed it. She didn't know how to explain that she wasn't ready to give more, that the room felt too heavy and too alert. She didn't know how to explain the pressure inside her chest. "I just played a little," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A little?" he repeated quietly, almost to himself. He didn't push her further. Instead, he nodded once and said, "Go take your seat." She exhaled quietly, a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, and walked back to her desk. The students stared at her as she passed by, some with curiosity, some with confusion, and a few with mild disappointment. She kept her gaze low, feeling her cheeks warm. When she sat down, she felt exhausted, as if she had just run a long distance. Her hands were still trembling slightly. She tucked them under the desk. The teacher walked back to the front of the room and resumed the lesson, but she could tell he was still thinking about her. His eyes drifted toward her now and then, trying to figure her out. She stared at the window, wishing for the comfort of the outside world, wishing she could go home just for a moment to breathe. But something in her chest felt different now. Not lighter exactly, but stirring. Because even though she only played a little, even though she didn't show much, something inside her had awakened. The part of her that remembered what it felt like to share music, even gently. She didn't know it yet, but the tiny melody she played was only the beginning of what would soon change everything. The rest of the class moved on, but the uneasy feeling in the room didn't fade. The new girl sat in her seat with her hands folded on her desk, staring down at her notebook even though music notes and lessons were happening around her. She felt like the small melody she played earlier was still floating in the air, hanging over her like a reminder of what she tried to hide and what she accidentally revealed. The teacher kept glancing at her. Not in a harsh way this time, but with a puzzled look on his face, like he was trying to figure out why someone with clear skill would choose to stay quiet. He didn't ask her anything else, but she could feel his attention now more than before, and that made her feel even more uneasy. The class continued with rhythm exercises, practice sheets, and listening to short pieces of music. The students laughed and chatted among themselves, as if nothing unusual had happened. But she felt every whisper, every glance, even if people weren't talking about her anymore. It was the kind of feeling that comes after being watched closely, like her skin still held the memory of all those eyes. When the bell finally rang, she took longer than everyone else to gather her things. She waited until most of the class had left so she wouldn't have to slip through crowds or answer any questions. But just as she reached for her bag, she heard footsteps approaching. "Hey!" a voice said softly. She looked up and saw one of the students from earlier standing near her desk. He wasn't smiling or mocking. He looked genuinely curious. "You actually know how to play, right?" he asked. She nodded slightly, unsure if she should say more. "That was pretty good," he added. "You didn't have to look at the keys much. People who don't know how to play always stare at their hands." She didn't know what to say to that. Compliments always made her feel strange, like they rubbed against a part of her she wasn't ready to uncover. "Oh," she whispered. "Thanks." He smiled politely and walked out without saying anything else. She let out a slow breath once he was gone. She didn't want attention, but somehow, attention had found her anyway. When she finally left the classroom, the hallway felt calmer. She walked slowly toward the exit, where the late afternoon sun spilled through the windows. She could hear distant chatter from students heading home, their voices mixing with the sound of lockers closing and footsteps echoing down the corridor. As she stepped outside, she felt the wind brush against her face, cooling the warmth she had carried since the moment she sat at the piano. She walked toward the school gates, thinking about how the teacher had looked surprised, maybe even a little embarrassed. He had expected her to crack, not play anything with confidence. But even though she only played a few simple notes, something inside her felt unsettled. It was as if she had accidentally opened a small door she had worked hard to keep shut. That night, when she returned home, the house felt quiet. The living room light was on, and the soft hum of the refrigerator came from the kitchen. She changed into comfortable clothes and sat on her bed, staring at her hands the way someone looks at something familiar yet strange. She hadn't touched a piano in months. Not properly. Not with intention. Moving to a new school, a new home, and a new environment had drained her emotionally. She didn't feel ready to play again. She didn't feel ready to show that part of herself. But now, after what happened in class, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She walked to her closet and opened the door. At the bottom, tucked behind a stack of old notebooks, was a small keyboard she had brought from her old home. She hadn't planned to use it anytime soon, but seeing it stirred something inside her. She took it out carefully and placed it on the floor. She sat down, plugged it in, and placed her fingers on the keys. First, she didn't press anything. She just sat there, letting her hands rest on the plastic surface. Then she pressed one key, then another. The familiar sound filled the room softly. She tried a few notes, adjusting to the touch again. And slowly, without thinking too much, she began to play. The melody she chose wasn't anything complicated. It was the same one she had played earlier that day, the simple childhood tune that comforted her. But this time, she let it flow naturally, without pressure or eyes watching her. Her fingers moved lightly but confidently. The notes came out smooth, blending together like warm colors on a canvas. She played until her shoulders relaxed, until the tightness in her chest loosened. She played until she remembered why she loved music in the first place. It wasn't for an audience. It wasn't for approval. It wasn't even for praise. It was for herself. For the feeling it gave her inside. For the way it made the world quiet down. She stopped playing and stared at the keyboard for a long moment. Her thoughts wandered back to the classroom, to the teacher's surprised expression, to the students' confused murmurs. She wondered what they would think if they saw her play like this, calm, sure, and connected to the music. The next day at school, she walked into the building with the same quiet steps as before. She didn't look around much. She kept her focus straight ahead. But the moment she entered the music class, she felt the shift. A few students looked at her with recognition now, not just indifference. The teacher glanced up when she walked in, his expression softer than the day before. She wondered if he was going to call her out again. She hoped he wouldn't. Class began normally. Warm-up exercises, group activities, and listening tasks. She participated quietly, doing what she needed to without drawing attention. But halfway through the class, the teacher paused and looked at her again. "Yesterday," he said, "you played something familiar. Simple but familiar." The room grew quieter, but not because of tension, because of curiosity. "You have a good ear," he continued, "and your technique shows practice." She felt her stomach twist. She didn't know where he was going with this, and she didn't want the attention. "You didn't play confidently yesterday," he said. "It seemed like you were holding back." She lowered her eyes, not wanting to meet his gaze. "I don't know your story yet," he added, "but I can tell you're capable of more than what you showed." A few students exchanged glances. Some nodded quietly. She wished the conversation would end there. She didn't want to be singled out again. But then the teacher stepped closer to the piano and said, "Music is not about perfection. It's about expression. And I think you have something to express." She didn't respond. She kept her hands folded on her lap. The teacher didn't call her to the front again. He didn't push her or ask her to play. But his words lingered in the air, like a gentle invitation. Not a demand this time. The rest of the class passed slowly, the atmosphere noticeably different. Students seemed more aware of her now. Not in a bad way, but in a curious one. When class ended, she gathered her things quickly and headed toward the door. But before she stepped out, the teacher called after her. "Keep practicing," he said simply. "Not for me. For yourself." She didn't turn around, but she nodded once. As she walked down the hallway, she felt something quietly stirring inside her again. It wasn't fear this time. It wasn't pressure. It was the beginning of confidence. A tiny spark, a reminder of what she carried inside. She didn't know it yet, but soon, she wouldn't be able to hide it anymore. The days that followed moved quietly, but inside her, something was shifting little by little. She didn't show it on her face, and she didn't talk about it with anyone, but she could feel it every time she walked into the music room. The space that once felt intimidating now felt different. Still unfamiliar, but not as threatening as before. Every time she stepped inside, she could feel the teacher's eyes on her, though not in the sharp, impatient way from the first day. Now, there was something gentler in his expression, something thoughtful. He didn't call on her, didn't force her, didn't make her walk to the piano again. He simply observed, letting her adjust at her own pace. The other students had also changed the way they looked at her. Some still didn't pay much attention, but a few were kinder now, offering small smiles or polite nods. They didn't crowd her, and she appreciated that. She didn't want to be surrounded by too many people. She liked quiet spaces, slow steps, and gentle moments. Anything loud or sudden overwhelmed her. One afternoon, while the class worked on group activities, she noticed the teacher watching her. He wasn't judging her. He was studying her carefully, as if he was trying to understand how to reach her without pushing her away. "You can join a group if you'd like," he said softly as he passed her desk. She nodded politely but didn't move. A part of her wanted to try, but another part held her back. Joining a group meant talking, cooperating, and explaining things about herself. Those things took energy she didn't always have. The teacher didn't pressure her. He continued walking around the room, helping different groups. She quietly hummed the exercises to herself and tapped soft rhythms on her notebook. No one bothered her. It was peaceful. After class, she stayed behind for a moment, as she often did, waiting for the hallway to clear. She packed her things slowly, trying not to make any noise. The teacher was collecting papers from his desk when he looked at her. "You play well," he said gently, not raising his voice. She paused. "You don't have to hide it," he added. "But I won't force you to show it either." She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. "Music is something that grows when we let it," he continued. "And I think yours is still growing." She wished she had the courage to thank him properly, but words stuck in her throat. Instead, she gave him a tiny smile before leaving the room. It was the first time she had smiled in front of him. That night, she sat on her bed with the small keyboard again. Her room was dim and quiet the way she liked it. She played the simple melody she always leaned on when she was unsure of herself. But this time, she felt a pull inside her, like her hands wanted to explore more. So she tried a new melody, slow, delicate, unsure at first. Her fingers stumbled a few times, but she kept going. The tune grew longer, deeper, fuller. She let her hands move without planning, letting her heart guide the rhythm. She played until late in the evening, losing track of time. The notes carried her through memories. Good ones, sad ones, and ones she didn't know she still held inside. Music had a way of pulling everything out, even things she didn't show anyone. When she finally stopped, she sat quietly for several minutes, her hands resting on her lap. She felt calm and full at the same time. Playing again didn't feel scary anymore. Felt like returning home. The next day, something happened that surprised her. During break time, two students approached her near the hallway. They weren't loud or rude. They seemed nervous, almost hesitant. "Hey," one of them said, "do you want to sit with us at lunch?" She blinked, unsure why they were asking. "You don't have to," the girl added quickly. "We just thought you might want company. That's all." She hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no because she was used to sitting alone. Silence was her safety net. But another part wondered what it would be like to not always be by herself. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. The two students smiled and led her to a table near the back of the cafeteria. They didn't bombard her with questions. They asked small, gentle things: what subjects she liked, whether she missed her old school, things that didn't make her feel cornered. She answered softly, only saying what she felt comfortable sharing. They didn't push her for more. She discovered something during that lunch. Being with people wasn't always heavy. Sometimes, it was warm and simple, like sharing a quiet corner with others who weren't trying to overwhelm her. Over the next few days, she sat with them again. Each time, it became a little easier. Back in music class, the teacher noticed the small changes in her. She raised her hand once to answer a question. Not loud, not bold, but present. She hummed along during warm-ups, no longer afraid someone might hear her. She even joined a pair activity one morning, just for a few minutes. She was slowly opening up, piece by piece. One afternoon, as class neared its end, the teacher made an announcement. "In 2 weeks," he said, "we'll have a small class presentation. Nothing formal, nothing fancy. Just each group or individual sharing something musical, anything they want." The room buzzed with excitement and groans. Some students loved the idea, others clearly dreaded it. Her heart tightened. A presentation, in front of the class. The teacher continued, "It can be singing, playing an instrument, even a simple rhythm exercise or a small composition. No pressure to be perfect. Just participate in some way." She tried to calm her breathing. He wasn't forcing her specifically. Everyone had to join. But the idea terrified her. She looked down, staring at her desk. Her hands felt cold. She didn't think she was ready for something like this. She could feel the old fear rising again. The fear of eyes watching her, expecting something from her. But then she remembered the teacher's words from earlier. "Not for me. For yourself." At the end of class, while everyone packed up, the teacher approached her quietly. "You don't need to decide today," he said gently. "Just think about what you might want to do." She didn't answer. She simply nodded. Over the next few days, her mind kept returning to the idea of the presentation. She tried to ignore it, but it lingered in every corner of her thoughts. At home, she played her keyboard again. The The simple melodies didn't feel as satisfying anymore. Her fingers wanted to explore something deeper, something fuller. She began experimenting, adding soft harmonies, shifting rhythms, trying new variations. Before she realized it, she had created a small piece of her own. It wasn't perfect, but it felt personal. It felt like something that belonged only to her. She played it over and over until she could feel the emotions behind every note. One night, as she finished playing, she sat quietly, listening to the last note fade. A thought echoed in her mind. Maybe I can share this. The thought scared her. It excited her. It made her hands tremble. She didn't want to be embarrassed. She didn't want people to think she was showing off. She just wanted to express something honestly. The next morning, she walked into music class with her usual quiet steps. The teacher looked at her and saw something different in her eyes. She approached his desk before class began. He looked up. Yes. She took a small breath. I want to play something, she said softly. The teacher didn't smile widely or react dramatically. He simply nodded with understanding, as though he had been waiting for her to say those words. Whenever you're ready, he replied. For the first time since she joined the school, she felt a spark of pride. Not loud or flashy, but warm and steady, like a quiet light growing inside her. She didn't know it yet, but what she would share in that presentation would leave the room completely silent. This time, not from judgment, but from awe. The news of the girl's performance spread through the school far quicker than she ever expected. It started with a few students talking about it in the hallway, repeating parts of the moment they witnessed. Then someone else shared a short recording they had captured on their phone, even though they were not supposed to film during class. Within a day, almost every student seemed to know about the shy girl who played the piano as if she had been doing it her whole life. When she walked into school the next morning, she noticed people glancing at her in a different way, not with judgment or cold curiosity, but with genuine interest. She kept her steps small and quiet, hoping the attention would fade, but everywhere she went, someone seemed eager to tell her how amazing she sounded. Some approached her with excitement, others with gentle curiosity. They asked how long she had been playing, whether she took classes, and why she had never played before. She tried her best to answer without drawing too much attention to herself. She was happy people liked her performance, but she still wasn't used to being noticed. For so long, she had learned to keep her head down and move through life without stirring anything. Later that week, she was called into the main office. She thought for a moment that she might be in trouble. The idea made her nervous, and she walked slowly, unsure of what she might hear. When she reached the office, the staff member greeted her with a warm smile. She told her the school was planning a big event, a talent evening where students could display their music, dance, art, or any other skills they had. The staff member explained that she had been chosen as one of the featured students because of the reaction her classmates had after her performance. They wanted her to play a full piece of her choice. The girl felt her chest tighten. The idea of playing in front of so many people made her nervous, even though she loved music deeply. But the staff member, noticing her quiet concern, assured her she would have time to practice and prepare. She told her that the whole school was excited to see her again. Even though that made her heart beat a little faster, she also felt something warm. A small sense of pride she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. After she agreed to join the event, she walked back to class feeling a mix of fear and excitement. When she stepped inside, her classmates looked up, and a few smiled at her. Some whispered to each other, but the tone was different now. Instead of judging her, they seemed happy for her. A couple of students even gave her a thumbs up, and though she didn't always know how to respond to gestures like that, she gave a small nod to show she appreciated it. At lunch, she sat at her usual spot. Not long after she opened her lunch, 2 students approached her and asked if they could sit with her. This had never happened before. She nodded, unsure what to say, but they filled the silence with friendly conversation. They talked about how amazing it was to see someone play like that, especially someone so quiet and humble. She listened politely, answering gently when they asked something. She didn't like being the center of attention, but she could feel a small shift inside, a sense that maybe things were beginning to change. Meanwhile, the teacher who had once forced her to play the piano seemed different as well. In class, the teacher made an effort to be warmer, more respectful. Instead of raising their voice or sounding irritated when students didn't immediately follow instructions, they tried to guide them more patiently. It was clear the moment in class had left an impact not only on the students but on the teacher too. There was a subtle softness in the way the teacher spoke to the girl now, as if they wanted to make up for their earlier behavior. The girl noticed this change but didn't hold anything against the teacher. She knew people made mistakes. She also knew the teacher had misjudged her because she had kept to herself. While she didn't want to be treated differently in an exaggerated way, she appreciated the teacher's quiet attempt to be better. As the date of the talent evening approached, she spent her afternoons practicing. The music room was often empty after classes, so she practiced alone, letting her fingers glide over the piano keys. Playing in that quiet space reminded her of her old life. The competitions, the long hours of practice, and the comfort she once felt sitting at a piano. She had moved to the new school because life had changed for her family, and she had left many things behind. But music was something she could never let go of. One afternoon, as she practiced, she didn't realize a few students had gathered outside the room, listening. When she finished the piece, they peeked inside and smiled at her. They told her the music sounded beautiful. She felt her face warm from embarrassment, but their kindness made the moment gentle instead of overwhelming. On the day of the talent evening, the school hall filled with students, teachers, and families. She stood backstage, holding her hands together to keep them from shaking. She listened to the applause after each performance, waiting for her turn. When her name was announced, her heart raced. She took a slow step forward and moved onto the stage, the lights softly glowing above her. The room felt large and quiet, but the moment she sat at the piano, she closed her eyes for a second and took a deep breath. She let the world fade away. She touched the keys gently at first, then with more certainty. The sound filled the hall, warm and soothing. Her nervousness faded as the music carried her. With every note she played, she felt more in control, more herself. The audience sat still, listening closely. Some leaned forward, some closed their eyes, and others simply watched her with quiet amazement. When she finally finished, the hall erupted in applause. She stood slowly and looked across the room. People were smiling, cheering, and showing their appreciation in ways she never expected. After the event, students approached her again, some in small groups, some alone. They told her how much they enjoyed the performance. Even parents she didn't know complimented her. The teacher who had once forced her into the spotlight came forward as well. With a sincere tone, the teacher told her they were proud of her and apologized for making assumptions in the past. The girl nodded softly, appreciating the honesty. As she walked home with her family, she felt a deep sense of relief and joy. The moment that had once filled her with fear had turned into something she would remember with warmth. She didn't become a loud or overly confident person overnight, but she no longer hid her talent or her voice. She realized she didn't have to be invisible to feel safe. Her new school felt different now, less intimidating, more welcoming. She knew not every day would be perfect, but she finally felt like she belonged. And all it took was one unexpected moment in class, where someone tried to embarrass her, but ended up helping her rediscover the strength she always carried inside.